Mexico will elect a woman president for the first time this weekend. The two candidates, who are both women, have ended their campaigns. Their political fate rests on a single round of voting, which takes place on Sunday. Our correspondent Ian Griot is in Mexico City. His report starts at the final rally of candidate Claudia Sheinbaum, who's currently leading her rival, Xochitl Galvez, by over 20 points, according to the opinion polls.
We are in the Zocalo, which is the symbolic heart of Mexico's nation and its democracy. And it's where Claudia Sheinbaum, a 61-year-old environmental engineer for the left-wing Morena party, is closing her campaign with the hope of becoming the first female president in all of North America. She's finishing on a high with a 20-point lead in the polls over her rival Xochitl Galvez, but it has also been a political campaign season marked by violence, with 35 candidates running for different posts murdered and drug cartels as the chief suspects. This highlights one of the huge challenges she will face if she becomes president. But this close of campaign is a really festive atmosphere, so let's see how her supporters are feeling.
I'm happy and I'm here because I believe in this project. I used to be very skeptical with politics and I wouldn't vote. But she convinced me.
She's one of us. I mean, she knows our people. She's humble and she's not authoritarian like the people that led this country before.
Now, Claudia Sheinbaum has gained momentum with the popularity of the current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO, who's her mentor. We heard her promise to carry on his policies, and as she says, take them to the second level. Critics say she could be a puppet of AMLO, but she says firmly she will rule independently if on Sunday she is elected, as her supporters are saying, as the first presidenta of Mexico.
Ian Griot, our correspondent there in Mexico City. History in the making in Mexico. Let's bring in for the analysis Gema Kloppe-Santamaria, who's Associate Professor of Latin American History and International Affairs at George Washington University and a Global Fellow at the Wilson Center. Gema, thank you so much for being with us here on France 24. We appreciate your time. We were hearing from Ian Griot in Mexico City. Claudia Sheinbaum, the continuity candidate in a sense, following the footsteps of outgoing President Obrador. Xochitl Galvez, promising to get tough on drug cartels. Give us your impressions of the two candidates.
Of course, I will begin by saying that Mexico is facing a historical moment. As Ian was mentioning, Mexico is going to be the first North American country to have a female president. This really reflects the strength of the candidates, but it also comes as a reflection of the cultural, institutional, and political changes and transformations that the country has experienced over the last 2 decades. I would say that they are both a strong candidate. Clearly, Claudia Sheinbaum is leading the polls. She's an entrepreneur. She's a woman of science. She's somebody that, has a strong support from the current president, but she's her own person as well. And she connects very much with the people. And then you have Xochitl Galvez, who comes from a very different business background that presents a coalition, the opposition coalition. And I would say that both are inheriting a country that has key challenges, especially on questions of security. And I would say that one of the great paradoxes that Mexico faces today is that it's going to have its first female president in the midst of a crisis of violence that especially affects women and girls in Mexico.
And clearly, it is a sign, as you were just saying, of great cultural change over the past 2 decades. Because if you stopped, I don't know, any 10 people in the street said, what are your impressions of Mexico? They would talk about, I suppose, drug crime cartels. They might talk about a macho culture. Has that really changed? This is something that is really happening, or are these two women just kind of, I don't know, two anomalies that have come forward? Is there genuine change happening in Mexico?
Yeah, I would point at several indicators that do tell us a different story of the country. No, I mean the country has now reached gender parity thanks to a reform, an electoral reform that pushed political parties to elect and put forward the candidacy of women. Mexico also adopted feminist foreign policy, and of course you need to also take into account the activism of women, of feminist movement on the ground, and also the activism of mothers of the disappeared and mothers of victims of violence. So I would say you have a lot of changes in the country that are reflected politically, socially, institutionally. So I would say that they are not necessarily the exception. I would say that they are rather one more indicator of how the country has transformed. Still, there is undoubtedly a lot of issues in Mexico with patriarchal culture and with discrimination against women. And again, like one of the more dramatic indicators of that is the crisis of femicides that the country is experiencing, the disappearance of girls and women, and just overall the persistency of gender-based violence, both at the domestic and also in the public level. So I would say that changes have occurred, but at the same time, the country continues to face key challenges.
So those changes are really positive and positive for women, and it's great to see it happening. And as you point out, there's been this constant chipping away at the problems in terms of holding women back to enable them to get pushed forward and develop and take charge of things and try to shape matters. And let's face it, the men have been in charge for a long time and haven't done such a great job. Maybe it is time for women to have a go and really sort of use a bit of feminine ingenuity in making things happen properly. You mentioned, though, the issues of crimes against women. You mentioned femicide, you mentioned domestic violence, horrific things that have been going on. Tell us more about that. How big are these problems in Mexico?
Yes, so I would say, in terms of violence, homicide levels have been decreasing over the last years. However, Mexico faces over 30,000 people killed every year. These are historical numbers. And in terms of the killing of women, only last year, Mexico had over 3,000 women murdered in Mexico. Not all of those murders are typified as femicides, but clearly that speaks to us about a very pressing crisis of insecurity. There are over 100,000 people disappeared in Mexico. There have been some debates about the numbers, but those are the numbers that we have and that we discuss. So disappearances, femicides, that is really a pressing issue. And of course, this has to do with the activities of criminal organizations, but it also has to do with state-led violence, or rather the criminal collusion of some state actors. So I would say the dimensions of the crisis are quite significant. In Latin America, Mexico, in absolute numbers, has the greatest number of killings against women, only after Brazil. And in terms of femicide rates, it's between the 5th and 6th country with highest levels of femicide. So I think in the Latin American region, Mexico does face very pressing issues.
So whether come Sunday we're talking about President Sheinbaum or President Galvez, both women will have major problems on their hands and major issues to resolve. And I'm wondering, when you think about the extent of the influence of drug cartels, then all the issues that you've just been outlining that women are facing, how does the new president get to grips with that? Because in a sense, I suppose, the new president will become just another target for those gangsters and those criminals.
Yes, the next president for sure will have to face several challenges, and both candidates have addressed to a certain extent, or have recognized that they are inheriting a country with high levels of violence, with key challenges in terms of the activities of cartels and other criminal groups. I think both of them had alluded to the fact that they will continue with the participation of the military in public security functions, something that is quite concerning, given that several human rights organizations and international observers have pointed at how the militarization of public security has led to human rights violations and has only increased the number of disappeared people in the country. Claudia Sheinbaum has clearly stated that she will continue with the militarization of the country, even beyond public security functions in terms of construction of public infrastructure, migration, handling, and other responsibilities. And the case of Xochitl Gálvez, she has argued that she will build a high-security prison a la Bukele. So there is real concern on behalf of civil society organizations and human rights organizations that both main candidates are promising to continue like some of the same militarized, punitive approaches that, to be honest, haven't yielded results in Mexico so far.
So still big problems ahead, and some of their policies, it seems, represent problems in themselves. Do you have a sense of who will win? Who do you think will become president?
I think it's very, very possible that Claudia Sheinbaum will be the next president of Mexico. She's leading the polls. She has a very, safe margin that I will say most surely is positioning her to be the next president of Mexico. And again, regardless of who wins, we will certainly have a woman in power in just a few days elected in Mexico.
Gema Kloppe-Santamaria, thank you very much indeed for joining us here and giving us your assessment and your analysis of the situation in Mexico. Enlightening as it was, and of course, as you point out, history will be made on Sunday with the first female president, well, not just in Mexico, but in the whole of North America, which clearly is something worth raising a glass to in terms of the thoughts of sexual equality and the advancement of women's rights. We, of course, wait to see how that develops. And once again, thank you to Gema Kloppe-Santamaria of the Wilson Centre and George Washington University for joining us here for Apropos on France 24. We take a short break. After that, it's our